DocTalk is brought to you by MERCK Animal Health, the science of healthier animals.
Hey guys, welcome to DocTalk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Steve Ensley. We're in the toxicology laboratory here at Kansas State University. Going to have a show. We're going to talk about water quality and where you send your samples to Dr. Ensley.
As dependable as the sunrise, in dairy parlors, open pastures, on ranches and feed yards across America. A place where reputation is more than a name, where the science of healthier animals is a way of life. It's the responsibility that drives who we are and what we do. Every decision, every day. It's your livelihood and our responsibility.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome to DocTalk. Dan Thompson here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Steve Ensley. We're here at Kansas State University's College of Veterinary Medicine, and we're here in the talk section where Dr. Ensley is the Director of Toxicology here at Kansas State, and we're going to talk about something you know.
Right, so water quality is a real interest of mine. That's what my master's and PhD were on, or drinking water quality. So I've got a real interest, and I think it's probably the most important nutrient that we have that we don't even look at most of the time.
So when you tell me a little bit about what your background was, what kind of research did you do on?
So my master's was actually drinking water quality of swine, and so we looked at the drinking water, measured probably 20 different parameters of the water, from the minerals to nitrate to coliform, and then tried to correlate that with any production or reproduction effects. And my PhD was on dairy cattle, and basically the same thing. We looked at these parameters of drinking water to see if what effects they did have on animals. And it's a big drinking water has a big impact on dairy cows, especially because 80%, 90% of milk is water, so it's directly related to water consumption, how much milk production you can get.
Well, and we see it correlated in feed yards to intake, and if there's something off with water and we decrease the water intake, we're going to decrease feed intake, and if we decrease feed intake is to a feedlot manager as airspeed is to a pilot.
Right.
Very,
exactly.
very important. So
exactly.
Fine tuning that. But what are some of the common issues we see with water, or things that are why we would be sampling?
So the number one issue really in feedlot situations is usually sulfur content or the sulfate content of the water, because with DDGs being a large component of our diets, there's a lot of sulfur issues with our diets, so we need to make sure we know what the drinking water is, because the impact is really total dietary sulfate, which includes the water and the diet. So at a minimum, we need to know what the water sulfate, drinking water sulfate is.
What are some of the other things that you see out there with like outside cattle and things like that, as the samples tend to roll into the lab?
So I just had a call this week from Bazine, Kansas, where they actually hauled water and they were hauling it in a fertilizer tank. They just used to haul fertilizer, and so they had nitrate issues in the drinking water and killed about 10 cows in a half an hour. But so drinking water, my drinking water parameters are nitrate, coliform for the bacterial concentration, the total dissolved solids. And to me, that's number one thing I want to look at, and then sulfate concentration.
Awesome. Well, let's take a break. Let's go to commercial. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of samples we're going to take, what time of year, many different things that you need to know about water quality for your animals, here with Dr. Steve Ensley, Kansas State University, Toxicology. Hey folks, Dr. Dan here. Welcome to Cattle First, as sponsored by Boehringer Ingelheim Vet Medica. And the term today, biosecurity. Biosecurity is security. It's like having a bouncer that keeps pathogens out and keeps disease out of your herd. One of the best tools you can use for biosecurity is a proper vaccination program, and work with your veterinarian on that. The second one is introduction of new animals. And when we bring new animals on the farm, making sure that if there's a disease that is important that we test for, that we have that done prior to bringing them on the premise. And if they haven't been, then we have a place to quarantine them until we can get the diagnostics back, I think is vitally important. Talking to your neighbors as cattle lean across the fence and communicate with each other, making sure that you have a community-wide biosecurity plan and vaccination plan, vitally important. Keep the disease out, be the bouncer.
When you're in the cattle business, no matter how much it's a business, it still starts with cattle. It's this basic notion that sits at the core of how we approach things at Boehringer Ingelheim. We understand when you put the cattle first, it just naturally leads to doing the right things. If you want to do well in this business, you start by doing right. Take care of the cattle, and they'll take care of you.
The state of Iowa and Iowa State University are proud to host the 2021 Beef Improvement Federation Annual Research Symposium and Convention. The convention will be located in downtown Des Moines with easy access to the airport, hotels, and local restaurants. Iowa State University is just north with its research and teaching farms. Join us in Iowa and experience how Iowa provides the beef industry with innovation to application.
ValleyVet.com is your one-stop shop for your every animal need, from prescription meds, vaccines, equipment, and more for the ranch to the show ring. Shop ValleyVet.com for fast shipping and great prices.
Valley Vet Supply.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome back to DocTalk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Steve Ensley. We're on faculty at Kansas State University, and Dr. Ensley and I go way back. We've spent a couple of decades together, and he's one of the people that really gets it. He's a former practitioner. His father is a practitioner. He understands the component of service and how the university can provide service to the stakeholders, which is the producers, the veterinarians, and beyond.
Right.
And so utilize our Tox Lab, utilize our services. That's why we took these jobs, is to come in here and serve. Now, when we're talking about water, you've got a container here. So pretty big container.
It is. So
It's bigger than I thought it'd be.
right. A lot of times, sample size is critical. If I can get 500 mils, that way I can have enough. If I've got to redo a test, or I have enough sample that we can do it with. If I get 10 mils in a tube, that's usually we can do it with that small amount. But I'd like to have a 500 mil size, and so this is kind of typical of what I would like. Most of my samples actually come in a pop bottle that was on a dash. Somebody washed it out.
Beer
cans, whatever. And I can use any of that water, but ideally I'd like to have a dedicated water sample that was collected aseptically as you can collect it, and mainly for the bacterial contamination that we want to look at there. So when you collect water, there's a couple of things I think I'd like to have you be aware of. So a lot of times it's collected at the wellhead or where the water comes out of the ground. So typically I like to collect it where the animals drink, because I want to see when it goes through the water distribution system what is actually there when the animals drink. So go to the drinking water device and try to collect put gloves on, try to collect an aseptic sample, get it on ice, get it submitted that same day if you can, because ideally within 24 hours of when you collected it is when we like to get it on a plate so we can see what the coliform concentration is, and that's the most accurate way to do that.
And coliforms would be E. coli.
Right. So fecal coliforms are what EPA has. That's their way to look at a standard method to look at bacterial contamination of water, and so that's the test we use. And standard methods say we need to collect it and get it on the plate within 24 hours for the most accurate result.
Yeah, but Dad and I got done working calves when I was in high school. Went over to the old pump handle well, and they had the ladle on there.
Oh, yeah.
And boy, that was some good water. Cold, and all that. And we were drinking it down, and the rancher came out and said, "Y'all aren't drinking out of that well, are you?" And we said, "Sure are. It's good water." He opened it up, and there were
a dead rats
and cats and different things floating in it. So probably pretty high coliform count.
Right. Well, luckily
we survived.
Yeah, luckily animals can tolerate really poor water quality. That's why we get away with a lot. But if we can, give them the best water that we have available, that's the ideal situation that we want to try to get to.
Okay, so we're going to take 500 mils. We're going to try to keep contamination out. Wear gloves if you can, not because you're afraid of the water, but you don't want to get stuff off your hands into it, right?
Exactly.
And then you said put it on ice.
If you can put it on ice, just to keep it chilled. Doesn't need to be frozen, but keep it on ice ideally, and then get it in a box, get it in the lab that same day that you collect it. So, don't collect it on a Friday. Try to get it during the week when you can get it to the veterinary clinic and get it in the, on ship that same day so we have it the next day. So
perfect. Leads us right to a break, folks. Great information. Summer coming up. Get your water tested. More with Dr. Steve Ensley after these messages.
Some call it a come from behind victory, an unlikely win, a reversal of fortune, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. This is our moment, our victory dance, because we choose confidence. We choose Zuprevo for BRD treatment. Ask your veterinarian to prescribe Zuprevo. Zuprevo is a fast-acting, long-lasting BRD treatment that you can count on to get the job done. Choose confidence. Choose Zuprevo from Merck Animal Health.
The state of Iowa and Iowa State University are proud to host the 2021 Beef Improvement Federation Annual Research Symposium and Convention. The convention will be located in downtown Des Moines with easy access to the airport, hotels, and local restaurants. Iowa State University is just north with its research and teaching farms. Join us in Iowa and experience how Iowa provides the beef industry with innovation to application.
As dependable as the sunrise, in dairy parlors, open pastures, on ranches and feed yards across America. A place where reputation is more than a name, where the science of healthier animals is a way of life. It's the responsibility that drives who we are and what we do. Every decision, every day. It's your livelihood and our responsibility.
ValleyVet.com is your one-stop shop for your every animal need. From prescription meds, vaccines, equipment, and more for the ranch to the show ring. Shop ValleyVet.com for fast shipping and great prices.
Valley Vet Supply.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome back to DocTalk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Steve Ensley, who is the director of our toxicology section at Kansas State University's Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, talking about taking water samples. And I as we talked during the break, that hauling water, you got to have a dedicated tank.
Right. So what the issue is, I've already seen it this week. If you have a tank that you use, big plastic polypropylene tank that you've used to haul fertilizer of any kind, you can't clean that enough to ever use that to haul water for animals. So if you've ever if you have to haul water, if you're low on water, or there, no water supply for the animals, and you have to haul water, you have to get a dedicated tank that only hauls water, because there's no way to get the urea and the nitrate out of the tanks that you've hauled fertilizer with. Because when I see death loss, that's always the scenario, and it's very concentrated. We kill animals very quickly because solubilized nitrate or urea is a great way to kill animals very fast, especially if they're thirsty.
Probably if you go to buy a used tank, you might want to ask what somebody used
So,
it for to haul.
yeah,
They've been using fertilizer.
Right. And there's no way, steel tanks or whatever, there's no way you can steam clean or get them clean enough where it's not a risk. And so to eliminate the risk.
Could someone buy a tank, fill it up with water, take some samples, send it in and see?
Right.
And that might be a way to find a cheap tank and test.
Right.
And that. What about pond water? Things like that. What are some things that we need to test for or look for?
So ideally, ideally with pond water, we want to try to, if we can, to provide water where animals don't have to go into the pond to drink water, because when they do, we see a lot of fecal contamination and decreases the water quality. So if there's any way that you can punch a hole through the dam to drain water into a tank where they drink out of, that's the ideal situation. But if they're drinking out of the pond, the biggest issue we see now is with blue-green algae. So phosphorus and nitrate, any runoff, especially after a rainfall event, could potentially this time of year could cause an algae bloom. And algae, when they bloom, they can produce a toxin that's very potent at very small concentration. So if you see anything that looks like paint on the water or any kind of you need to, algae bloom is different than the moss that grows, but anything like that, be aware that may be an issue. We may need a water sample to look at.
Don't let the cow dog drink it.
Right, exactly. Because I've seen cases where a dog swam through the pond, got out on the other side, and fell over and died because they drank the water, and there was the neurotoxin, blue-green algae in there that will immediately kill animals or people.
Yeah, pretty important to note. So get your samples, have a dedicated water tank for hauling water. Ponds, we're looking at blue-green algae and trying to have drinker points or something to keep cows out.
Right, if you can do that, that's ideal.
Perfect. So, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have a wrap-up session here with Dr. Steve Ensley at Kansas State University.
When you're in the cattle business, no matter how much it's a business, it still starts with cattle. It's this basic notion that sits at the core of how we approach things at Boehringer Ingelheim. We understand when you put the cattle first, it just naturally leads to doing the right things. If you want to do well in this business, you start by doing right. Take care of the cattle, and they'll take care of you.
Beef Teaching Farm is a place where producers,
entrepreneurs,
faculty,
innovators,
consumers, and most of all, our students
have an opportunity to learn.
We strive for excellence in the beef business and provide an environment for others to engage in production agriculture.
Through teaching, advocacy, and hands-on instruction,
we can grow the next generation of beef producers.
We are
We are. We are.
the Iowa State University Beef Teaching Farm.
The state of Iowa and Iowa State University are proud to host the 2021 Beef Improvement Federation Annual Research Symposium and Convention. The convention will be located in downtown Des Moines with easy access to the airport, hotels, and local restaurants. Iowa State University is just north with its research and teaching farms. Join us in Iowa and experience how Iowa provides the beef industry with innovation to application.
The elements can be relentless. Make sure they have respiratory protection to match.
ValleyVet.com is your one-stop shop for your every animal need, from prescription meds, vaccines, equipment, and more for the ranch to the show ring. Shop ValleyVet.com for fast shipping and great prices.
Valley Vet Supply.
This segment is brought to you by the Beef Quality Assurance Program and the Kansas Beef Council, improving animal care and beef safety for more than 20 years.
Hey folks, welcome back to DocTalk. Dr. Dan Thompson here with Dr. Steve Ensley. We're here in Kansas State University in the toxicology area of the diagnostic lab. We're very proud to have our native son back to Kansas and here in Kansas State, and great teacher. You're talking about we've changed these beef cows now to milking a lot more, and that just puts more pressure.
Yeah, exactly. So we have all these high milk EPDs animals that are producing a lot of milk, so they need water. So in any animal production situation, the water quality is very important. I want to have that optimum, but water availability is the biggest issue. I see if we can't get water to the animals in an adequate amount, when they come to drink, have a drinker or drinking device, or have adequate area to drink or water supply, you can produce enough water at that time they need it, because quality is very important. But if water availability trumps that every time, so we have to have enough water available on a hot day when they drink or they've eaten and want to go drink, that everybody can drink and get an adequate amount of water. So
yeah, we say in the NRC that cattle drink 5 times their dry matter intake in the summer and 3 times their dry matter intake in the fall, winter, and spring.
Exactly.
So it almost doubles the water amount that these animals need. Plus, you put on that they're milking, and we turn them out with their calves.
Right.
The calves are starting to really take off.
Yeah, they're demanding. So genetically we've got a really high production animal. If you want to perform, for them to perform at their optimum, water availability is a huge issue.
It's a nutrient only second to oxygen.
Right. That's what I say. Water. The diet's great. But we don't have oxygen or we don't have water secondarily. That's that's going to be a huge impact.
So, what times of the year should I take samples? Does it matter? Or?
If it's a groundwater or water that comes from below the surface up, that's usually very stable. It doesn't change much even when in droughts, one sample a year usually will, or maybe once every 2 years, will probably tell us what the groundwater is. Surface water is totally different. It's dependent on the rainfall and availability. How much is there and the temperature. So, surface water, ponds, creeks, those kinds of things, really need to be sampled when the animals are going to be introduced, so we know what a baseline water, quality looks like. And then, for the summertime, May 1st, we can get it when they go after. That's a good time to sample the water. So
before turnout, or when we turn cattle out, test the water. It's been a great show. I appreciate what you do, and it's fun to work with you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, water quality, I know I'm kind of that's a real interest of mine, but I really believe has a big impact, and we just know very little about it. We don't measure it, we don't know it, but one of the biggest things that you could overlook in an operation.
Folks, Dr. Steve Ensley here at Kansas State Toxicology Department Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Thanks for watching us. Make sure to work with your local veterinarian. If you want to know more about what we do at DocTalk, you can find us on the web at www.doctalktv.com. I'm Dr. Dan Thompson with Dr. Steve Ensley, and we'll see you down the road.
DocTalk is brought to you by MERCK Animal Health, the science of healthier animals.
As dependable as the sunrise, in dairy parlors, open pastures, on ranches and feed yards across America. A place where reputation is more than a name, where the science of healthier animals is a way of life. It's the responsibility that drives who we are and what we do. Every decision, every day. It's your livelihood and our responsibility.